Hello, my name is Dr. Elise Labar, and it is an honor to present my research from the historic Coolidge Auditorium in the Library of Congress, and I wish to acknowledge that this talk occurs on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway people. I want to thank Susan Vita and the Library of Congress and American Musicological Society for sponsoring this lecture series. I want to add an additional note of thanks to the ASCAP archives and the librarians of the music division, including Mark Applebaum, Kazim Abdullah, and Laura Shizzle, as well as the Library of Congress media and production team and senior producer Anne McLean, who made this recorded lecture possible. The research presented in this lecture is a part of a larger project that examines how issues of race and gender, copyright and technology, Depression-era politics, and Western identity at American mass spectacles serve as a catalyst to gain new insight into the modern cultural and musical history of the United States. Drawing upon the wealth of materials at the Library of Congress, this lecture will shed new light on the issues of mass culture, music licensing, protest, and the reaffirmation of the American popular music canon on the West Coast in the final years before the United States' involvement in World War II. My research was conducted not only in the Library of Congress Music Division's impressive collections of sheet music, photographs, bound encore books, ephemera, but also in other branches of the library, such as the Recorded Sound Research Center, Sonic Archive, Copyright Office, Manuscript Division, and the Prints and Photographs Divisions. This presentation highlights the materials found in the ASCAP Foundation collection in the Music Division. Radio and Chains Music, the 1940 ASCAP Radio War and Music Festival. In September 1940, a bitter conflict between the American radio networks and songwriters was well underway. Since 1932, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, ASCAP, had contracted with individual radio stations. But now, ASCAP wanted to renegotiate its licenses and charge the networks for a total of a 7.5% increase plus an annual licensing fee. The 1939 to 1941 battle between the National Broadcasters Association, NAB, and ASCAP for the airwaves used radio as a weapon and fashioned beloved American-created music as artillery. ASCAP assembled its famous membership to present a highly publicized musical protest in the form of a two-part concert series at the San Francisco Golden Gate International Exposition, or commonly referred to as the GGIE. ASCAP President Gene Buck announced that this music festival would be, quote, the greatest group of creative talent ever in one spot in the history of the world, end quote. ASCAP intention was to show their unification and strength to the American public and radio networks during a time of key contract negotiations, but the protest failed. Instead of adding pressure to the networks, this act of defiance proved to be one of the factors that led to the eventual boycott of ASCAP-affiliated music in 1941. ASCAP, the first U.S. performance rights licensing organization, was founded in 1914 by a consortium of composers, mostly those associated with the popular genre and Tin Pan Alley music, who sought to protect and enforce their copyrighted musical works based on the copyright law of 1909 that granted the copyright owner compensation for a public performance of the work. Sociologist John Ryan highlights that ASCAP became a private organization that protected a public law. Even in its infancy, the ASCAP organization had issues collecting royalties from businesses. The latter, for example, hotels and restaurants, believed that performing a song increased sheet music sales and additional payment per song was unnecessary. The 1917 unanimous Supreme Court ruling in Herbert versus Shanley Company ruled in favor of ASCAP and upheld the right of a copyright owner for compensation for a public performance of his work. The ruling solidified ASCAP's existence and laid the legal groundwork for future disputes. From its inception, the society had and is currently facing issues of agency, lawsuits, and modernity, but at the time, it provided the only comprehensive performance royalty society in the United States. From 1914 until the completion of World War II, ASCAP was the dominant influencing organization in the popular music genre. By 1940, ASCAP membership had swelled to over 1,400. The society not only oversaw payment for sheet music and public performances in concert venues, but also included payments from hotels, restaurants, cafes, dance halls, movie companies, and most importantly, radio stations. Although payments to members were classified, members who were out of work were given subsidies, and the society was paying $50 a week to the daughter of Stephen Foster, a composer who did not benefit from copyright protection. A governing board of 24 directors managed ASCAP, half publishers and half composers. To be a member, one must be a composer or author of music and have an established repertoire of at least 5 works. And ASCAP distributed royalties based on the number and type of performance, for example, song versus a symphony. The internal politics regarding the subjective distribution methods of ASCAP created tension between established and younger members during the first and second decades of the society. Because ASCAP was the sole protectorate in the United States, membership included the most popular and talented stable of American songwriters and composers. But the rules also excluded many potential members, especially those who did not have an established repertoire, thus excluding those writers and composers from genres other than popular and classical. So social scientist Tim Taylor argues that ASCAP contributed to the absence of, quote, jazz, blues, or any other music by African Americans from radio for quite some time after its advent in the 1920s, end quote. Thus explaining the lack of hillbilly, country, jazz, and blues as chart toppers, even though all 3 genres had healthy commercial and audience support throughout the 1920s and 30s. Jazz composers who enjoyed success during this era, like Fletcher Henderson, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, faced hardship when applying to ASCAP and eventually earned membership years after several large hits. Arguably, the society favored white and male membership, part due to the genre of music the society protected, mainly popular and Tin Pan Alley music. ASCAP did grant membership to prominent African American composers like William Grant Still, the first African American composer to have a symphony performed by a professional orchestra, and W.C. Handy, the father of the blues. And in turn, they supported the efforts of ASCAP continuously throughout their careers. In order to meet programming demand, stations heavily relied on ASCAP's songwriters' works to fill the slots and provide a wide variety of audiences on the airwaves with popular music, thus enabling ASCAP control of music performed on the radio and the ability to shape Americans' taste in music. With the advent of radio, ASCAP's source of income shifted from sheet music and live performances to the radio. By 1939, 2/3 of ASCAP's revenue was the blanket licensing fee that authorized the grantee use of the entire ASCAP repertoire for specific types of use, like radio. At this point in time, ASCAP made contracts with stations, not the networks. In 1932, NAB and ASCAP negotiated a licensing agreement that charged each station a flat blanket licensing fee and 2% of the station's gross advertising revenue for 1933, 3% for 1934, and 5% for 1935. Grappling with this shift in technology and mass consumerism, ASCAP was determined to enforce their rights and lobbied Washington for firmer copyright laws on the airwaves. Understandably, the stations realized that they had to fight ASCAP's dominant business practices because they were paying a fee even when ASCAP music was not performed. Both NAB and ASCAP viewed each other as monopolies. The conflict went so far as the creation of anti-ASCAP legislation and a 1934 antitrust suit by the U.S. Department of Justice, which was abandoned a year later. After 7 years of failed negotiations, the contentious battle between ASCAP and the NAB came to a head. The 1935 contract was about to expire in 1940, and ASCAP decided to propose new increases to their fees. The first, ASCAP proposed a reduction in rates for the affiliates, or individual stations, 50% for the smallest and weakest stations, 33.33% for medium-sized, and none for the largest. ASCAP demanded a 7.5% increase of the network's gross advertising revenue in addition to the annual blanket licensing fee, approximate hike of around $4.5 million to $9 million. President Gene Buck announced to the Los Angeles chapter of ASCAP that the amount of royalties ASCAP was asking for was inconsequential to the amount of business the networks were bringing in because of their music. Unwilling to pay the increase, the NAB met and decided to request a formal licensing agreement from ASCAP by July 1939. Buck responded to NAB's request by positioning ASCAP as an agent of public service to the American people and declared to the 1,450 composers and approximately 130 publisher members of ASCAP in an open letter dated 1939, quote, "We have a duty and responsibility to thousands of enterprises which depend upon the steady flow of new music to entertain their patrons, and an equal responsibility to the thousands of musicians and artists who interpret that music, and above all, to the public, which needs the inspiration and stimulation and relaxation of music to maintain its morale in these days of uncertainty. The American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers is conscious of its duty and will perform it. When the public says, 'Let's start the show, let's have some music,' we'll see to it that they shall have music. We're show people. We have a tradition that the show must go on. The show will go on," end quote. Buck believed that by labeling ASCAP as fundamentally American and a force that was indispensable to American culture during these days of uncertainty, he would find an empathetic resonance with the American public who had struggled through years of depression and faced an impending war in Europe. Although ASCAP's fundamental mission was to collect money for its membership, Buck cleverly creates an alternative narrative where the performing rights organization's membership enveloped itself in the mantle of national public service that is the main focus and reason for ASCAP's existence. In September of 1939, the NAB created a rival organization, Broadcast Music, Inc., or BMI. Although there are many differences between ASCAP and BMI, the fundamental variable is the method of dispersing royalties to the membership and the type of new music the society supported. ASCAP's disbursement of royalty payments hinged upon a hierarchical system based upon three criteria. The first, the amount of commercial performance, the member's seniority in ASCAP, and the quality of composition, which provided a larger payout to composers within an established catalog. Membership of those of color and females constituted a small percentage of income due to the criteria needed for induction. Unlike ASCAP, BMI opened its membership to composers, regardless of genre, who had yet to establish a hit song catalog and paid per number of performances. The most important result of the creation of BMI was the need to search out non-ASCAP members' works, thus leading to the influx and accessibility of marginalized music genres to audiences on the airwaves and the revitalization of public domain songs such as folk tunes. In addition, BMI allowed stock ownership and provided service for all stations, whether or not the station was an NAB member. The issue between ASCAP and NAB became litigious, with Buck and other members of the ASCAP being served warrants, brought to court, or even arrested due to the issues of blanket licenses. Buck was arrested on a Montana warrant in Arizona and released on a $10,000 bail. His arrest was based on an application made to Montana radio stations to pay ASCAP the amount owed, or else, quote, their licenses to play music owned by ASCAP would be revoked. The battle for the airwaves transferred to the state and federal legislature. Duplicated on a larger scale a year later in San Francisco, ASCAP presented a free 25th anniversary celebratory music festival in Carnegie Hall during the week of October 1st, 1939. The 8-evening program included works by ASCAP composers and would, quote, embrace every type of music in the field of composition, from symphony to swing. ASCAP archivist Janelle Travers explains, quote, we think this series of concerts may have been an early version of the Treasure Island concert, end quote. The Carnegie Hall concert set the precedent that foreshadowed the utilization of public festivals with high-profile members as a bargaining tactic for ASCAP. The fall through summer 1940 was a precarious time for American music on the airwaves. From August 4th to 7th, 1940, the NAB met in San Francisco at the St. Francis Hotel and firmly declared to ASCAP that the new license fees needed to be lower. ASCAP had until December 31st, 1940 to renegotiate its expiring contract with NAB. If the contract wasn't renewed in time, the works of the ASCAP membership would be barred from the air. As a response to NAB's ruling, ASCAP chose the GGIE to stage a massive public demonstration in the form of 2 concerts. ASCAP felt pressured to prove its value and purpose to the American public and created a calculated protest at Treasure Island, the GGIE's fairgrounds on a man-made island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. The red arrow on the slide points to that location. Ironically, the GGIE was a fair that symbolized nationalistic goals for peace, but in actuality served as the battleground between ASCAP and BMI. Selected in 1935 by the United States Congress to host an American World's Exposition, the city of San Francisco was quick to market the unique and long-term geographic and cultural relationship that city had with countries that bordered the Pacific Ocean. On February 18, 1939, San Francisco's Golden Gate International Exposition, which eventually attracted more than 8 million visitors and ran 2 seasons, February 18th to October 2nd, 1939, and May 25th to September 29th, 1940, opened. Geographically closer to the events in Japanese-occupied China than the concurrent New York World's Fair, the 3 main purposes of the GGIE were: 1, to position the United States as a world power at the threshold of a world war; 2, to aid the nation and San Francisco in particular economically during the Depression; and 3, the exposition served as a platform that attempted to facilitate a multicultural dialogue that promoted peace and was the first occurrence where the fine arts of the Pacific Rim were assembled at an American massed event. The fair was not only an idealistic enterprise, but also a practical one. One of the most ardent pro-fair supporters, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, saw the potential in funding a mass spectacle that would not only promote his administration's policies, but also provide succor during the Depression in the form of jobs and entertainment. As with many 20th century fairs, local and national composers created musical works dedicated to or reference the GGIE. The Library of Congress Music Division houses several of the 59 individual pieces of music written specifically for the fair. For example, famed band leaders Edmund Franklin Goldman and Richard Goldman composed a march, The Golden Gate, specifically for the GGIE, and performed it on the fairgrounds during their residency in 1939. There wasn't a moment fair visitors were not inundated with music, whether it was the free outdoor performance by the official exposition band, Benny Goodman or Count Basie performing in the Federal Plaza, or the Tower of the Sun's Carillon, the architectural symbol of the GGIE, seen here on the front cover of the sheet music souvenir edition of San Francisco, Where I'll Meet You at the Fair. The Carillon is still a part of contemporary San Francisco soundscape and can be heard daily from the tower at its post-fair location at Grace Cathedral. The fair provided work and income for not only local musicians and entertainers, but also professional radio stars. Although the fair was a public gesture by politicians and countries to create a global example of peace during a period of war, it was short-lived. The GGIE's facade of Pacific unity and escapist entertainment programming masked undercurrents of political strife and impending world war. Within the time frame of the fair's opening day in February of 1939 and its final week in September 1940, major global conflicts and genocide had occurred. Europe was at war. There was a crisis of Jewish refugees and others escaping war zones. France was occupied, and the Manchurian campaign had escalated. American isolationist policies were at a tipping point. The change in global events broke through Treasure Island's fantasy-like spectacle. Like a mirror to political events, the fair ended with a war on its own fairgrounds during the last few days of the 1940 season. Local newspapers described ASCAP Day with more warlike metaphors. Counterpunching at American broadcasters who threaten a boycott of their music, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers are carrying their battle to Treasure Island this Tuesday for one of the greatest musical shows of the year. Lucky San Francisco will become the musical battleground as the organized tunesmiths attempt to prove that their music is indispensable to America. The program shows that ASCAP is bringing its heaviest artillery to bear. San Francisco would house an epic music battle where composers would fight for their livelihoods. Indeed, the number of talented composers, musicians, and lyricists present to perform their own works was astounding and arguably unprecedented in American popular music history. The local press grabbed hold of the sensationalized cause and promoted the ASCAP Festival Day with headlines and articles announcing the upcoming deluge of famous songwriters. The San Francisco Examiner announced to its readership the headliners of the ASCAP Day Festival two-part concert as bringing, quote, the most musicians from both a qualitative and quantitative standpoint ever to assemble at Treasure Island at one time, end quote. In the very hotel NAB met and decided to go forward with an imposed deadline, Buck held a press conference where he denied the purpose of a competing performance royalties organization. He stated, quote, BMI doesn't mean a thing. All my friends want to know why I don't fight BMI. BMI hit its peak at the network-dominated NAB convention in this very same hotel, end quote. When prodded by the assemblage about the impending radio ban of ASCAP music, Buck scoffed and replied, quote, we're not here to fight BMI. We're here to show the folks just what ASCAP has to offer. So far as I'm concerned, BMI doesn't exist. The finest thing in the world would be the end of ASCAP music at midnight on New Year's Eve. Let them all play their public domain and amateur music. I couldn't ask for anything better. Buck also told the press that although the NAB controlled the airwaves, many individual radio stations were signing with ASCAP anyways. Although Buck postured his position at the press conference as cavalier, the size of the concerts and the media coverage showcased the importance of ASCAP to the American public. The press interviewed composer Harold Arlen on his arrival at the St. Francis Hotel. As Arlen posed for photographs, he warbled to the tune of Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, Who's Afraid of the BMI, and framed himself with sheet music. Due to the conflict with ASCAP, NAB barred the broadcast, and the festival performances were never aired on the radio. The San Francisco Chronicle reported, quote, the arriving ASCAP members were miffed but amused to find that their Treasure Island program was not being broadcast by a major network, although it was one of the big musical events of the year. Without NAB's knowledge, ASCAP arranged for the concerts to be recorded and hired a local San Francisco company, Photo and Sound Inc., to record both concerts. These recordings at this time are the only surviving sonic record of the two-day ASCAP concert. Discovered several decades in a music sale by Bay Area historian David A. Banks, who realized the musical significance of the recordings and issued them in partnership with Music and Arts Programs of America as a 4-CD set in 1997 entitled Carousel of American Music, the fabled 24 September 1940 San Francisco concerts. These rare recordings can be found at the Library of Congress and are added to the Library of Congress's National Recording Preservation Board's registry list in 2015. The library's National Recording Preservation has provided an index of recording essays where one can find an outline of the two-day ASCAP concert penned by David Banks. As a scholar, I'm grateful ASCAP arranged for the off-the-record taping because even though the board station KFWB of Hollywood and KYA, the Hearst outlet in San Francisco, requested a line feed from the island for the ASCAP performance, they were met with a firm no by the NAB. The radio station on the fairgrounds, W6XBE, was also barred from recording, thus making the Photo and Sound Inc. recording the sole recording from the concert. This lecture will include original audio excerpts from that recording. Harold Arlen's response to NAB's prohibition of the broadcast echoed Gene Buck's 1939 letter to membership. Quote, that's all right, Arlen said. The boys will just say it with music on the island. We'll let the public decide. ASCAP would shift power of the NAB to the American people, and hopefully there would be a substantial enough public outcry. On September 24, 1940, a free afternoon symphonic concert and evening popular concert were given on the GGIE fairgrounds. With both popular song and show tunes alongside symphonic works, there would be music that interested a wide audience. In a nod to the amusement park setting of the fair and the general popularity of popular song, movie, and show tunes, organizers awarded the popular music performance the primetime evening time slot. The ASCAP Day poster advertises the Mammoth Free Review in addition to the top names on the program. It is worth noting that the poster date lists August 4th rather than the actual performance date of September 24th. This discrepancy is due to the fact that the first effort to put on a performance on August 4th did not happen due to miscommunications between organizers, music representatives, and GGIE President Marshall Dill and ASCAP President Gene Buck. The poster was printed by the publicity department in their haste to get the concert publicized and showcases the performers who ended up participating in the ASCAP Day Festival, like Arland and Cohan. The 2 o'clock afternoon performance at the outdoor Federal Plaza attracted over 25,000 people. You could see the crowd in this period photograph from the San Francisco Chronicle. Featuring living composers' orchestral works performed by the San Francisco Symphony, including Roy Harris's Johnny Come Marching Home, Howard Hanson's Third Symphony, and William Grant Still's G Minor Symphony. Still was present to conduct his own work and was the only composer to have more than one work performed on this afternoon program. In the following audio clip of the start of the second movement of Still's G Minor Symphony, or commonly known as Song of a New Race, you can hear the level of sound quality of the recording, as well as 2 chimes from the Tower of the Sun's Carillon. Because the performance was in an outdoor venue, ambient sounds, like the Carillon, were captured on the recording. Laments from the local and regional press bemoan the poor acoustics from the Federal Plaza outdoor venue on the fairgrounds. A Time magazine reviewer commented on the distraction of ambient sound during the concert, quote, "The amplification was tinny, airplanes zoomed, firecrackers popped, a military band zing-boomed past, but everyone thought the concert was swell," end quote. The 2 chimes are very faint and peal right before the entrance of the strings at the start of this clip, with the second chime's pitch within the key of the start of this piece. See if you can hear it in this clip. whose multi-movement piece Circus Day closed the long program, acted as MC, and his lively commentary enhanced the performance. It is worth noting the absence of any female composers from this symphonic afternoon program. A signed program housed at the San Francisco Public Library San Francisco History Center has several of the composers' signatures, thus proving their attendance and willingness to sign autographs. The signed program has several signatures, including Gene Buck's, Howard Hanson's, and William Grant Still. You can see the signature of William Grant Still underneath his name in the program. The concert performance by their home symphony amused and delighted the audience, but there was building excitement for the evening concert with Fair Turnstile records shattered. The free evening concert, which showcased the 60-member San Francisco Symphony, partnered with the biggest stars of the popular music world. The concert would include performances by Jerome Kern, Judy Garland would sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and W.C. Handy would play trumpet on St. Louis Blues. The evening concert exceeded organizers' expectations, with reportedly 15,000 people crowded in the California Coliseum, which had a 9,200-seat capacity. The fire marshal halted the throngs of people streaming into the already packed indoor hall, and at one time ordered the overflow audience members to vacate immediately. With the performance already 35 minutes delayed because of seating, the fire marshal capitulated and allowed the overflow to remain in the Coliseum while directing the unseated patrons to Festival Hall, which is a space not usually open to the public for VIP events or special events, and that only had a capacity of 2,000. Performers and even President and MC Gene Buck were caught in the melee to get into the stadium, prompting Buck to yell out, "If I can't get in there, there won't be a show." Various reports state 35,000 were turned away at the doors and directed to listen to the concert over the fairgrounds loudspeakers in and around Festival Hall. The overflow audience could at least hear, if not see, the event. The evening performance was dedicated to operatic and unforgettable songs of past and present. Comparing the program with the final recording, there was some improvisation on the spot. After Hoagy Carmichael performed his hit, Stardust, he was cajoled on stage by Buck and the audience to sing and play Little Old Lady. Carmichael's response to Buck's request was picked up by the stage microphones. The song starts hesitantly, punctuated with a bit of laughter by the audience and stage antics by Carmichael before beginning.
Hoagy, a few years ago, wrote a lovely little song called Little Old Lady. And Hoagy's going to sit down at the piano and strum it and coo it all at one time.
This is strictly unrehearsed. I don't remember whether I remember the lyrics or not. I'll try it, though. Little old... A little old lady passing by, catching everyone's eye. You have such a charming manner, sweet and shy little...
This brief transaction by Buck and Carmichael on stage not only exemplifies the improvisatory talent of the composer, but also the familiarity Buck had with his fellow ASCAP members. Exemplified in the photo taken on stage at the Coliseum from the ASCAP Foundation archives at the Music Division, the star power of the concerts was astounding. Over 50 of the most famous American composers and performers of the era were present, and 30 performed their own works. Buck ordered the group to take this photo, exclaiming, quote, "All of you dear people, get together here on the stage for a picture. We have never been together in such number before, and we may never meet like this again." The most popular performer of the evening was 18-year-old Judy Garland, singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, with the composer Harold Arlen accompanying her on the piano. Oscar-winning song of 1939, Somewhere Over the Rainbow resonated with Depression-era audiences. Here's a clip from Garland's performance at ASCAP Day. Notice the clarity of the recording and the lack of sound from the audience.
Over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
The program took a nationalistic stance, especially in the final program songs. War was waging in Europe, and although it was happening at a great distance from San Francisco, audiences were kept abreast of the developments in the newspaper front headlines and radio programs. Gene Buck commissioned The Flying Flag by Carrie Jacobs Bond for ASCAP Day specially. Jacobs Bond stated that her piece received a standing ovation that she feared was, quote, more to patriotism than to the song. She would later turn over all the profits of The Flying Flag to the American Red Cross.
Hear the drums, hear those drums, see the flag, here it comes. There is something brave in a flying flag, something gallant and bold.
The final two composers of the program were George Cohan, then 62 years old, and 52-year-old Irving Berlin. Cohan performs four of his most famous works, Give My Regards to Broadway, Yankee Doodle, Boy, and Your Grand Old Flag, and Over There. Programming Cohan's Over There and Yankee Doodle Boy would have resonated with the 1940s San Franciscan audience, especially those who lived through World War I, as deeply patriotic and appropriate for the current political climate. Buck gave an introduction, then a chord is sounded, and Cohan began singing Over There. You can hear the crowd's rousing applause during and at the end of this short clip.
Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the drums coming everywhere, so beware, say a prayer, send the word to beware, we'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
The final and most poignant performance of the All-Day Music Festival was Berlin's God Bless America. Written during World War I, the song became a second anthem during World War II. W.C. Handy reminisced, quote, "None will deny that Berlin is talented, but it requires a real genius to time a song, to resurrect it when the nation is in need of it," end quote. As the Jewish-American composer began to sing God Bless America, the audience of 15,000 simultaneously stood and joined him in song, a fitting end to an American music festival born out of protests during a time of war. The section in this audio clip is when the audience joins Berlin spontaneously in song.
From the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, like we all.
The ASCAP Music Festival and the publicity surrounding it was a method to establish agency and a position of power in order to add pressure for contract negotiations. The society believed that by aligning itself with the American public, audiences would be outraged and demand ASCAP music. Due to the success in San Francisco, ASCAP staged a repeat festival at the New York World's Fair a month later, with several changes to the program. Although the bi-coastal platforms garnered ASCAP major press coverage, the society's success was short-lived. All of ASCAP music was boycotted on January 1st, 1941 until October of 1941. Incredulous, ASCAP supporters could not believe the American public did not demand ASCAP music after the NAB boycott. Deems Taylor could not believe that the, quote, public would put up with the songs of second-rate BMI composers and referred to BMI as bad music indefinitely. In 1941, the U.S. Justice Department reopened its 1937 investigation and antitrust suit against ASCAP, but this suit also included BMI, CBS, and NBC. The result was a settlement with a consent decree signed by ASCAP and BMI. ASCAP agreed not to discriminate against customers and set rates at a fair price. The negotiation with NBC was 2.75% of net sales and 2% for local affiliates, a significant reduction in the original demand. Issues stemming from the ASCAP conflict, boycott, and reinstatement on the airwaves cost Gene Buck his presidency. In April 1942, Deems Taylor was elected ASCAP president and ushered in a reorganization of ASCAP's royalty disbursements from the hierarchical payout to BMI's frequency of performance system. The result of the NAB versus ASCAP conflict changed music history and business with issues and protocol that are used today. Composers have to choose to either be members of ASCAP or BMI, and regardless of membership affiliations, are paid per performance. Currently, negotiations for payments by streaming services to songwriters and composers are contentious to this day. The 1940 ASCAP protest concert is a moment in time where issues of music licensing, royalties, and mass culture played out in the fanfare and pomp at the San Francisco World's Fair during an era steeped in an economic depression and at the brink of World War II, and should be included in the historical discourse of popular music. In closing, I would like to include a quote by W.C. Handy from his 1941 autobiography, Father of the Blues, regarding his performance at ASCAP Day as a, quote, program that never before nor can ever again be duplicated this side of Kingdom Come. Again, I would like to thank the Library of Congress and American Musicological Society for sponsoring this lecture series.